He stepped between danger and a woman he thought needed help, carrying nothing but habit and quiet resolve. What followed was not gratitude, but a doorway into protection, shared silence, and a child's steady gaze, where power softened and home slowly chose them. Stay a while. Listen with the lights low. He noticed the tension before he understood it. Not the words, but the way they were delivered. Low, measured, meant to stay unnoticed. A man stood too close to a woman near the edge of the parking lot, his posture casual in the way people adopted when they believed no one would interrupt them. The woman listened without reacting, her body still, her gaze steady. She did not step back. That, more than anything, caught his attention. He had been reaching for his daughter's door handle, already half inside the evening routine seatbelt, reminder about homework, the familiar negotiation over dinner. Habit guided him more than thought. He paused with his hand still raised, keys warm in his palm. He told himself it was nothing. He told himself that stepping in was unnecessary. He had learned over years of careful living not to borrow trouble. But the man's hand lifted, not quite touching, hovering close enough to suggest it could. The woman's expression did not change, but something in her stillness felt deliberate, like a held breath. The space around them seemed to narrow. He closed the car door again. He did not raise his voice when he approached. He did not rush. He simply placed himself where the man would have to acknowledge him, standing at a slight angle, neither confrontational nor passive. Close enough to be present, far enough to avoid escalation. It was a position he had learned without instruction. Years of navigating classrooms, hospitals, and small domestic emergencies had taught him where to stand. "Everything all right here?" he asked. The man turned, surprised more than angry. His eyes flicked to the woman, then back. He smiled, a thin, practiced curve. "Just talking." The woman shifted then, just slightly, not toward safety, but toward space. Her eyes met the single father's briefly, assessing. There was no relief in them, no plea, only attention. "I think the conversation's done," the father said. His tone remained even. He did not mention frets. He did not accuse. He made it easier for the moment to end than to continue. The man exhaled through his nose, weighing options. For a moment, it seemed he might press. Then he noticed the child watching from the back seat, her face framed by the window, eyes wide and serious. Something about that presence altered the calculation. The man stepped back, lifted his hands in mock surrender, and walked away without another word. The space he left behind felt heavier than before. The father remained where he was, unsure whether to move closer or retreat. He was aware of his heart now, the quiet acceleration beneath his ribs. He had not planned to intervene. He had not felt brave. He had simply acted, the way he did when a pot boiled over or a fever spiked, responding before fear could speak. "Thank you," the woman said. Her voice was calm, unshaken. It did not carry gratitude so much as acknowledgement. She stood straighter now, brushing invisible dust from her sleeve. She wore a tailored coat that did not quite belong to the setting, but she carried it without self-consciousness. Her composure felt earned, not performed. "You didn't have to do that," she added. "I know," he said, "but I did." She studied him for a moment longer than politeness required. Her gaze was direct, not intrusive. He sensed she was noting details, the car seat, the scuffed shoes, the way his body angled unconsciously back toward his child. He resisted the urge to explain himself. Silence, he had learned, often said enough. The sound of approaching footsteps reached them, measured and purposeful. Two figures emerged from between parked cars, their attention immediately on the woman. They did not rush to her side. They positioned themselves around her, subtle but unmistakable. She did not introduce them. Instead, she turned back to the father. "You should go," she said, not dismissive, protective. He nodded, relieved to accept the permission. He returned to his car, sliding into the driver's seat with movements more deliberate than before. His daughter leaned forward. "Was that lady in trouble?" she asked. "I think she handled it," he said, fastening his seatbelt. He did not look back as he drove away, though he felt the pull to do so. Some moments, he knew, were not meant to be revisited. In the side mirror, the parking lot shrank into distance. The routine of traffic lights and familiar streets resumed, carrying him back into the life he understood. Yet something lingered, unsettled. Not fear, not pride, just the quiet sense that he had stepped briefly out of habit and that the space he had crossed might not remain empty. The next morning arrived without ceremony. The father woke before the alarm, as he often did, listening for the small sounds that told him everything was as it should be. The apartment held its usual quiet, the refrigerator's low hum, the distant traffic, the steady breathing from the other room. He lay still for a moment longer than necessary, letting the day arrange itself in his mind. Breakfast was simple: toast, sliced fruit, a glass of milk that his daughter insisted on pouring herself. She moved with the seriousness of someone entrusted with an important task, tongue pressed lightly against her teeth as she concentrated. He stood nearby without interfering, ready but unobtrusive. When she finished, she looked up at him, searching his face for approval more than praise. "Good job," he said, and she smiled, satisfied. They left the apartment on time, jackets zipped, routine intact. The encounter from the night before had receded into the background, filed away among other moments that had required attention and then release. He did not replay it. There was work to be done, schedules to keep. That was the shape of his days, now forward motion, careful balance. It was mid-afternoon when the knock came. He had not been expecting anyone. The sound carried through the apartment, firm but unhurried. He hesitated only long enough to set down the dish he was drying. When he opened the door, she stood there as if she had always known where to find him. She wore different clothes this time. Simpler, a neutral coat, no sharp lines, her hair pulled back without precision. She looked less like someone passing through and more like someone arriving. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "I hope this isn't intrusive," she said finally. "I wanted to thank you properly." He stepped aside without thinking. The gesture surprised him only after it was done. She entered with a quiet awareness of space, pausing just inside the doorway as if taking measure of the room. It was small but orderly. Nothing unnecessary. The marks of a child's presence were everywhere: drawings taped to the wall, shoes lined carefully by the door. His daughter appeared from her room, drawn by the unfamiliar voice. She stopped short when she saw the woman, studying her openly. "This is the lady from yesterday," she said, not asking. "Yes," the woman replied, meeting her gaze at eye level. "Hello." The child nodded once, satisfied, and returned to her room without further interest. The woman watched her go, something in her expression softening, then disappearing again. "I didn't want to involve you," she said, turning back to him. "But I felt it would be wrong not to come." "You don't owe me anything," he said. He gestured toward the kitchen. "Would you like some tea?" She considered the offer, then nodded. "Yes, thank you." They sat at the small table, cups warming their hands. The silence between them was not uncomfortable, but it was deliberate. He noticed how she held herself, even now relaxed, yet alert, as if comfort were something she allowed selectively. "I won't pretend I'm in danger," she said, "but there are complications." He did not ask for details. He simply listened. "I wanted you to know that your presence mattered," she continued, "more than you realized." He accepted the words without ceremony. Compliments, he had learned, did not require defense, only acknowledgement. Their conversation stayed within ordinary bounds: work, school schedules, the practical rhythms of daily life. She did not mention her guards. He did not mention the man from the parking lot. When the tea was finished, she stood. "I won't take more of your time," she said. He walked her to the door. As she stepped out, she paused. "I may need help again," she said, not as a request, but as a possibility offered. He nodded once. "If I can." She smiled then, briefly. It was the first time he saw it. Not practiced, not guarded. And then she was gone, leaving the apartment unchanged, and yet subtly not the same. That evening, as he tucked his daughter into bed, she asked, "Will the lady come back?" "I don't know," he said truthfully. She considered this, then nodded. "Okay." The light went out. The door closed. And somewhere between routine and something unnamed, a door had opened without announcement. She did not come back right away. Days passed, then a week, and the father returned fully to the rhythms that required no explanation. Mornings folded into afternoons, evenings settled into their familiar patterns. He packed lunches, signed permission slips, answered emails after his daughter slept. Life did not pause to make room for unanswered possibilities. When she did reappear, it was without warning and without ceremony. He noticed her first not by sight, but by absence, the way conversations in the room softened slightly, the way attention shifted without anyone naming it. He was seated near the window of the small community center, waiting for his daughter's after-school program to end. Parents sat scattered across folding chairs, some scrolling phones, others exchanging fragments of conversation that never quite became dialogue. She stood near the bulletin board, reading notices she likely did not need. She blended more easily here than she had any right to. No sharp edges, no demand to be seen. She caught his eye only after he looked up fully. The recognition passed between them without surprise. She walked over, unhurried. "I hope this isn't inconvenient," she said. "I was told this was where I could find you." "It usually is," he replied. She sat beside him, leaving a respectful distance. The chairs creaked softly under her weight. For a while they watched the doorway together, waiting for children to emerge in bursts of noise and motion. "You seem settled here," she said eventually. "It works," he said. He did not elaborate. She nodded, as if that answer carried more meaning than it appeared to. Her gaze moved around the room, not critically, but attentively. She noticed the handmade posters, the uneven floor tiles, the scuffed corners. He wondered what she made of it all, and then dismissed the thought. It did not matter. When his daughter appeared, she ran to him first, arms wrapping around his waist with the force of habit and certainty. Only then did she notice the woman. "You came back," she said, stating it plainly. "Yes," the woman said. "I did." The child considered this, then smiled, as if a small expectation had been quietly met. From that afternoon on, their lives began to overlap in ways that required no formal agreement. The woman appeared at the edges of routine, sometimes at pickup, sometimes at the small cafe near his apartment where he took his daughter on weekends. She never imposed herself. She waited to be invited into each moment, and when she was, she stayed within its boundaries. He learned quickly that she valued predictability more than excitement. She arrived when she said she would. She listened more than she spoke. When she asked questions, they were practical, grounded in the present rather than the past. He responded in kind. They did not discuss what she did for work. He did not ask. The few times her phone rang and she stepped away, her voice changed just enough to suggest authority, but she returned always to the same quiet presence. His daughter took to her in her own way, not with immediate affection but with curiosity and testing. She showed her drawings, explained the rules of games with unnecessary precision, asked questions that were neither polite nor impolite, only honest. The woman answered them all without condescension. When she did not know something, she said so. When she did, she explained carefully, as if the child's understanding mattered. One evening as they walked together toward his apartment, groceries bounced between them. He noticed how naturally the woman adjusted her pace to match his daughter's shorter stride. She did not comment on the weight of the bags, though he suspected she was unaccustomed to carrying them herself. Inside the apartment, she accepted the smallness of the space without remark. She sat at the table while he cooked, observing rather than interfering. The sounds of chopping and simmering filled the room. His daughter set the table with exaggerated care, glancing occasionally toward the woman as if seeking acknowledgement. "Thank you," the woman said when the meal was served. The words carried no surprise, only appreciation. They ate together, conversation sparse but easy. Silence did not rush to be filled. It settled around them, shaping itself into something companionable. Later, after his daughter was asleep, the woman lingered by the door. "You don't have to keep making space for me," she said. "I know," he replied. She studied him, then nodded. "Still, I wanted to say it." She left then, the door closing softly behind her. He stood for a moment longer than necessary, listening to the quiet she left behind. It did not feel empty. The days arranged themselves around her presence without ever announcing that they had done so. She did not arrive every day, and when she was absent, life continued unbroken. That, he realized, was part of why her company felt safe. It did not demand rearrangement. It slipped into the spaces already there. On weekends, they sometimes crossed paths at the park near his apartment. The playground was modest swings that creaked, a slide dulled by years of use. His daughter claimed it with the easy ownership of familiarity. The woman stood nearby at first, hands folded, watching with the attentiveness of someone unused to standing still without purpose. Eventually, she sat beside him on the bench. They spoke little. The child's laughter carried across the space between them, light and unguarded. "She trusts you," the woman said quietly. "She decides those things on her own," he replied. The woman nodded, accepting the truth of it. She did not reach for the child, did not try to earn affection through performance. When his daughter approached, breathless and flushed, the woman listened to her account of the game as if it were important. That seemed to be enough. There were signs, occasionally, of the world the woman managed beyond these moments. A car that waited at a careful distance. A conversation ended abruptly when someone approached. She never explained these interruptions. He never asked. The boundary held, not because it was rigid, but because it was rooted. One evening, his daughter fell asleep on the couch while they sat together, a book open and forgotten in her lap. The woman hesitated before moving closer, as if unsure whether the gesture would be welcome. He watched her carefully lift the child, her movements tentative but gentle, carrying her to bed with a concentration that bordered on reverence. "She's light," the woman said afterward, as if surprised. "She's growing," he replied. The woman lingered in the doorway of the child's room for a moment longer than necessary, her expression unreadable. When she returned to the living room, she sat again without speaking. "You do this alone," she said eventually. Not as a question. "Yes." The word carried no bitterness. It was simply fact. "I don't know how," she said. He looked at her then, not fully, but enough to understand that the statement held more than curiosity. It held admission. "You learn," he said, "because you have to." She absorbed that in silence. As weeks passed, trust accumulated through repetition, through her showing up when she said she would, to his willingness to let her exist in their orbit without explanation, through the child's steady acceptance, which did not waver. They shared meals that were unremarkable and therefore meaningful. They waited together in quiet rooms. They learned each other's preferences without discussion. The way he took his coffee, the way she folded napkins absent-mindedly, the way both of them paused before entering a room where the child slept. The affection that grew between them did so without urgency. It lived in glances that did not linger too long, in gestures that remained careful. He noticed it in the way she stood slightly closer now, in the way she allowed moments of fatigue to show. She noticed it in the way he listened without interruption, in the way he adjusted plans without complaint when the child needed rest. Neither of them named it. One afternoon, as they walked back from school, the child slipped her hand into the woman's without looking. The gesture was brief, instinctive. The woman froze for a fraction of a second, then relaxed, allowing it. Her other hand trembled slightly at her side. The father noticed. He said nothing. By the time they reached the apartment building, the child had let go and run ahead. The woman stood still for a moment, her gaze following. "She doesn't do that with everyone," he said. "I know," the woman replied. They climbed the stairs together, the sound of their steps measured and even. The apartment door opened. Shoes were placed where they belonged. Life resumed, and somewhere within that ordinary continuity, something settled into place. Not dramatic, not declared, but real all the same. The first sign that something had shifted came quietly, almost politely. A car that idled too long across the street from the school. A different route, suggested without explanation. The woman's arrivals became more precise, her departures more deliberate. None of it disrupted the surface of their days, but the father noticed. He had learned over time to read what changed before it was spoken aloud. His daughter noticed too, though she lacked the language for it. She asked why they were leaving earlier, why they waited inside instead of on the steps, why the woman sometimes stepped away to take calls that ended in silence. He answered simply, offering reassurance without detail. Children, he knew, did not need full explanations. They needed consistency. The woman tried to keep the tension from reaching them, but it surfaced in small ways. She scanned rooms before sitting. She positioned herself so she could see exits. Once, she gently redirected his daughter away from a window without comment. The gesture was subtle, but it stayed with him. One evening, after his daughter had gone to bed, the woman did not leave right away. She stood by the kitchen counter, her hands resting on the cool surface as if grounding herself. "I didn't intend for this to touch your life," she said. He leaned against the opposite counter, arms crossed loosely. "It already has." She met his gaze, something like regret passing through her expression. "That's what I was afraid of." He waited. Silence, he had learned, was often the most generous response. "There are precautions I can't avoid," she continued. "They aren't about fear. They're about responsibility." "To who?" he asked. "To everyone," she said. "Including you." Including her. The mention of his daughter shifted something in the room. He felt it settle heavily, not as accusation, but as reality. "I can manage my own risk," he said. "But she didn't choose this." "I know," the woman replied quickly. "And that's why I'm here now, to talk before anything escalates." They spoke carefully, weighing words the way one weighed fragile objects. She explained enough to make the situation clear without exposing unnecessary detail. There were no enemies, no imminent danger, only visibility and the consequences of it. He listened, measuring her truth not by what she said, but by what she withheld. She was not minimizing, she was not dramatizing. That, more than anything, reassured him. "I don't want to step back from this," she said finally, "but I will if you asked me to." The offer sat between them, heavy and sincere. He thought of his daughter asleep in the next room, of the small trust she placed in the woman without hesitation, of the stability he had worked so carefully to build. "I need to know that she's safe," he said. "She is," the woman replied, "and if I can't guarantee that, I won't stay." The clarity of the statement surprised him. There was no pleading in it, only resolve. The next few days tested that resolve. A schedule change disrupted routine. A cancelled outing disappointed his daughter, though she hid it well. The woman grew quieter, more contained. The father found himself watching for signs of strain not only in her, but in himself. One afternoon his daughter asked, "Did we do something wrong?" "No," he said immediately. "Sometimes grown-ups just have to be careful." She accepted that, though her gaze lingered on the woman later, searching. That evening, the woman knelt in front of the child. "I might not be around as much for a little while," she said, "but that doesn't mean I'm gone." The child nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "Just don't disappear." "I won't," the woman promised. The word lingered long after she left, heavy with implication. The father stood at the window, watching the street below, feeling the cost of protection settle fully into view. It was not about danger, it was about what had to be carried, and by whom. She asked to speak with him on a morning that otherwise looked ordinary. The sky was overcast, the kind of light that flattened shadows and made the world feel smaller. His daughter was already at school. The apartment was quiet in a way that felt intentional, as if the space itself were waiting. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table. No tea this time, no small talk to ease the moment open. The woman folded her hands once, then let them rest apart, palms down. She did not look away when she began. "I haven't been honest with you," she said. "Not because I wanted to deceive you, because I didn't want it to matter." He nodded. He'd expected something like this. Not the details, but the shape of it. "I run a company," she continued. "Several, technically. They're large, visible. And I am not optional within them." She waited, watching his face for reaction. He gave her none. Not because he was unaffected, but because he was choosing to listen before responding. "There are people whose job it is to manage risk around me," she said. "Public, private. Most of the time it stays abstract. But sometimes it becomes personal." "That's why the parking lot," he said. "Yes." She did not embellish. She did not list achievements or numbers or influence. She spoke as someone describing a responsibility rather than a triumph. "I didn't want you to know," she said, "because I didn't want you to treat me differently." and because I didn't want your daughter anywhere near that weight." He absorbed this in silence. He thought of her carrying groceries, of her waiting on park benches, of the careful way she held his sleeping child. None of that changed. "I don't care what you own," he said finally. "I care about what reaches my door." She nodded, a subtle release in her shoulders. "That's fair." "I also care about whether my child feels safe," he added. "Not just physically, but in her life, in her expectations." "I know," the woman said. "And that's why I'm telling you now, so you can decide what this costs you." The word decide lingered. He had spent years making decisions that allowed little room for risk. This one felt heavier, not because of danger, but because of attachment. "Does your world get quieter?" he asked. "Or louder?" She considered the question. "Louder," she said, "but also lonelier." He did not respond right away. He looked at the place on the wall where his daughter's drawings overlapped, taped one over another as space ran out. Life, he thought, had a way of insisting on itself. "I'm not impressed," he said at last. "And I'm not afraid of money or titles, but I won't let her be confused about what matters." "I wouldn't ask you to," she replied. They sat there, the truth between them now, stripped of illusion. It did not shine. It did not demand reverence. It simply existed. That afternoon, the woman met his daughter outside the school gates. She knelt to her level, her coat brushing the pavement. "I have something to tell you," she said. The child tilted her head, attentive. "I have a job that sometimes makes things complicated," the woman continued. "It doesn't mean I don't want to see you. It just means I have to be careful." The child thought about this. "My dad is careful too," she said. "Yes," the woman replied softly. "He is." "Are you going away?" the child asked. "No," the woman said, "but I might need to stand a little farther back sometimes." The child nodded once. "That's okay," she said. "Just don't lie." "I won't," the woman promised. That evening, after his daughter was asleep, the father walked the woman to her car. It was not the same one that usually waited at a distance. This one was unmarked, ordinary. "I don't know what comes next," he said. "Neither do I," she replied. "But I won't pretend to be smaller than I am, and I won't ask you to be bigger." He looked at her then, really looked, not at the power she carried, but at the restraint with which she carried it. "That's all I needed to hear," he said. She nodded once. No relief, no declaration, just understanding. As she drove away, the street returned to its familiar quiet. The truth had not disrupted the foundation he had built. It had simply tested it. And it held. The shift, when it came, was not dramatic. It arrived through adjustment rather than announcement. The woman did not withdraw, but she changed how she moved through their days. She arrived earlier, left later, timed her presence around the edges of routine instead of inside it. The father noticed the effort in that restraint. It would have been easier, he suspected, to take control, to assign drivers, to set rules, to restructure the space around her needs. She did none of that. Instead, she asked questions. "Is this a good day? Would it help if I waited? Do you want me here for this, or after?" The questions mattered more than the answers. They signaled something he had not expected, respect for the life he had already built. One evening, as they prepared dinner together, she stood beside him at the counter, sleeves rolled carefully, movements measured. His daughter sat at the table, coloring quietly. "I could make things easier," the woman said, not looking at him. "Logistically, safely." He paused, knife still in hand. "I know. But easier isn't always better," she added. "No," he agreed. "Sometimes it just makes things louder." She smiled faintly at that, a private acknowledgement. "Then I'll stay within your noise level." It was not a promise. It was a boundary offered. He watched how she honored it. When decisions affected his daughter, she deferred without resentment. When security concerns arose, she handled them without intrusion. He learned that her version of commitment did not involve taking over, it involved stepping back deliberately. The child sensed the steadiness of it. She grew more relaxed in the woman's presence, less watchful. She began to assume her place rather than test it. One afternoon, she asked if the woman would be there for dinner. When told yes, she nodded and returned to her game without further thought. That ease mattered. The father felt the weight of his own choice settle gradually. Staying did not mean shielding the woman from her world. It meant allowing her to remain without reshaping his. It meant trusting her to carry what was hers, and trusting himself to protect what was his. One night, after the child had gone to bed, they sat together on the couch, not touching, but close enough to feel the shared warmth. The lights were low. The city outside moved at its usual distance. "I don't need saving," the woman said quietly. "I know," he replied, "and I don't want to be someone who disrupts what you built." "You don't," he said. "You're careful. That counts." She exhaled slowly, as if releasing something she had been holding since before she met him. "Then I'll stay," she said, not as an answer, as a practice. He turned toward her then, just enough to meet her gaze. That's the only kind that lasts. They sat there until the silence grew comfortable again. No declarations followed. No plans were laid out in advance. What mattered had already been decided, not through words, but through the steady alignment of action. Up the hallway, his daughter slept undisturbed. The apartment held its quiet. And in that quiet, staying took on its truest meaning. The changes that followed did not announce themselves. They settled in the way dust did gradually, almost invisibly, until the shape of the room felt different. Mornings became easier, not because there was less to do, but because there was less to carry alone. The woman learned the rhythm of the apartment without rearranging it. She knew which cupboard stuck, which floorboard creaked, which mornings required silence more than conversation. She did not comment on any of it. She adapted. The child noticed first. She began to assume the woman's presence the way she assumed the sun would rise, not with excitement, but with trust. She left space for her at the table without being asked. She brought her drawings without explanation. When the woman was late, she asked where she was, not with worry, but with expectation. "She'll come," the child said once, certain. And she did. The woman's world remained large, but it no longer pressed inward. What security existed stayed at a respectful distance. Cars waited farther down the street. Conversations happened elsewhere. The apartment remained untouched by urgency. When the door closed behind them, it closed fully. Evenings settled into a pattern. Dinner, homework, quiet play. Sometimes the woman read while the child built elaborate structures on the floor. Sometimes she listened as the father recounted the small challenges of the day. She did not offer solutions unless asked. She had learned that presence here mattered more than efficiency. One night the child fell asleep between them on the couch, her weight warm and unresistant. Neither adult moved. The television remained muted, forgotten. The woman's hand rested still, uncertain whether to adjust the blanket. The father reached out and did it himself, a small practice motion. She watched him with something like reverence, not for the act itself, but for its constancy. "This feels like a place I didn't know how to build," she said quietly. He did not look at her. "It builds itself," he said, "if you don't rush it." She nodded, absorbing the truth of that. There was no moment where they named what they were to each other. It was not necessary. The way she stayed late without checking the time, the way he left space for her without fear of dependence, the way the child moved freely between them, certain of both. That was enough. On a weekend afternoon, rain pressed softly against the windows. The child colored at the table. The woman sat nearby, reviewing documents she did not need to hide. The father washed dishes, the sound of water steady and familiar. It occurred to him, without surprise, that this was home. Not the apartment, not the routine, but the shared understanding that nothing here required performance. No one needed to be impressive. No one needed to be rescued. The woman closed her folder and set it aside. She joined him at the sink, drying the dishes he handed her. Their movements aligned without comment. Outside, the world continued loud, demanding, insistent. Inside, what remained was quieter. A child who slept without fear. A woman who no longer stood alone. a man who had not lost himself by letting someone stay. When the doors were closed, nothing followed them in, and nothing they needed was left outside.